Hey guys, my name is Rachel and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. So the video I have for you guys today is a very special video because I'm doing this video in collaboration with another true crime YouTuber named Joshua Miles. If you have not checked out his YouTube channel yet, I highly suggest doing so because he is one of the best true crime YouTubers on this platform in my opinion. He's actually the one that came up with this whole summer of collaborations to kind of bring together the true crime community and bring you guys so many different cases with so many different creators. I highly suggest checking out his channel and checking out all the other channels that are involved in this collaboration. So with that being said, the case that we have for you guys today is a very frustrating one because it seems very obvious. It seems like we know all of the answers, but at the same time, we're just going off of things that people said or what people did or odd behaviors exhibited by the people involved. So we think that we know the answers, but we could be very off or we could be spot on. It's like you never know. So with that being said, today we are going to be talking about the unsolved disappearance of Nicholas Barclay. Nicholas Barclay was born on December 31st, 1980 in San Antonio, Texas. He had an older brother named Jason and an older sister named Carrie. Nicholas was described as a wild child who was always getting into trouble at home and at school. He skipped school all the time, but when he did attend school, he was always getting in trouble with his teachers, and he'd actually gotten in trouble for threatening a teacher before. He had a juvenile record, which included him breaking into a convenience store and stealing a pair of shoes, and he actually had a sentencing hearing set for June 14th, 1993, where he had a possibility of being placed into a group home, which we will get into more in a few minutes.
According to Nicholas's childhood friend Kevin, most of Nicholas's problems had actually started when Nicholas's brother Jason had moved back in with Nicholas and their mum, who was called Beverly. And Jason had actually not been living at home with his mother and brother for quite a while before he moved back in. Now, before Jason moved back into the family home, Nicholas and his mother Beverly had a really good relationship. They were quite close. However, Jason had a drug problem, and that caused tensions and stresses for both Nicholas, his mum, and Jason. Sadly, when Jason moved back into the family home, Beverly, their mother, started using drugs too. Jason began to enable his mother's behavior. Jason also had a lot of behavioral issues and actually created quite a negative environment to the family in the family home. Now, this entire mix of rampant drug use in the family home and the negative environment that had been created, it was no wonder that the young and impressionable 13-year-old boy, Nicholas, started lashing out.
Along with Nicholas's behavioral problems that we mentioned before, Nicholas had started cussing and yelling at his mom and would hit her and physically assault her to the point where the police were called to his house multiple times per month. He'd also gotten 3 tattoos by the age of 13 that were given to him by another kid with a dirty sewing needle. He had a T tattoo on his right hand, a J on his left shoulder, and an L and an N on his left ankle. So all of this just sort of paints the picture of how Nicholas was as a child and around the time that he went missing.
Now, on the morning of the 13th of June 1994, Nicholas went with some of his friends to go play basketball in his hometown of San Antonio in Texas. His mother gave him about $5 in cash before Nicholas walked out the door and began to make his way to the area where him and his friends were meeting to play basketball, and that area was about a mile to 2 miles away from the family home. Nicholas and his friends went out, started playing basketball for a few hours, and that was until Nicholas phoned for his mum to come pick him up. However, Nicholas's mother actually worked a night job and worked the night shift, so she would sleep during the day. So by the time that Nicholas had actually rung the family landline to get his mother to come pick him up, she was fast asleep. She was in a deep state of sleep and didn't hear the phone ringing. But Jason, Nicholas's brother, did hear the phone ringing, and he picked up and answered, and when Nicholas asked him to go get their mother so that she could come pick him up, Jason just said, "No, you can walk home. It's just a mile or 2 away. You can walk home. We're not going to wake up Mum. Walk home." This would be the last time that anyone would see or talk to Nicholas ever again.
Now again, after going out and playing basketball with his friends, he didn't end up showing back home when he was supposed to. This sort of set off an alarm for the family, but they weren't too concerned at first because Nicholas did have a history of running off and coming back after a day or two, so the family was just assuming that there's no way he could have gotten very far, and this was just another one of these running away episodes. And like we mentioned before, he did have a court hearing on the 14th, which was a day after he went missing, so the family thought that it was very possible that he was just running away because of that. This court hearing was going to decide whether Nicholas got to stay with his family or be put into a rehabilitation group home for juvenile delinquents, and it was honestly not looking very good for him. They thought that after June 14th, Nicholas would for sure show back up. But still, Jason and his sister notified police when he hadn't shown up after a couple of hours. Now, the police were pretty slow to act at first because of his history of running away and the fact that he did have that court appearance that he really didn't want to go to. Police also kind of figured that he couldn't have gone very far since all he had with him was $5 and the clothes that he was wearing. However, after more days had passed and his court date came and went, and after doing their searches around the surrounding areas, police started realizing that there may be more to this disappearance than a kid who was just trying to leave and come back a few days later. There was absolutely no sign of Nicholas anywhere, and he had never ran away for more than a day or so, so at this point, police full-on launched their investigation.
Now, the first possible break in this case actually came 3 months after Nicholas was last seen, on the 25th of September. And this possible break came from when Jason, Nicholas's brother, phones the San Antonio police to report that he had actually seen Nicholas try to break into the family garage, but that Nicholas had actually run away when Jason had caught him doing so. Police were quick to follow up on this lead and searched the entire neighborhood, but found no trace at all that Nicholas had actually been in the area. And by this point, neither the police or even Nicholas's mother actually believed Jason at all. They didn't believe his story.
Then, on October 7th, 1997, so over 3 years after Nicholas's disappearance, law enforcement received a phone call from a man at a youth shelter in Lorraine, Spain, saying that Nicholas had been living at this youth shelter and had just escaped from a human trafficking ring. They said that Nicholas had been abused for years and he just wanted to go home. When police first saw this young man, he was dressed in a scarf and a hat, sunglasses and gloves and a big jacket. He was basically just covered from head to toe. He didn't really say much other than that he was a victim of human trafficking. He was scared and trying to recover after suffering severe abuse that he had been through for the past 3 years. So for the time being, he was put in an orphan home where people interviewed him and asked him questions and tried to figure out this entire situation. After a while, he finally told them that he was Nicholas, but he said that he didn't remember anything about his life before he was kidnapped. He didn't remember where he lived. He didn't know what his family was like or anything like that. But they called his family to let them know that their missing family member had been found, so his sister hopped on a plane to Spain to come and identify him and bring him home.
When she got there, the two actually met up in the courtyard of the shelter, and she ran up to him and gave him a massive hug and was in a complete state of disbelief that they had found her long-lost missing brother alive. Of course, she immediately identified this boy as being her missing little brother and decided to bring him home back to San Antonio. Now, at the time that Nicholas had gone missing, he actually had blonde hair and blue eyes. He was 13 years old when he went missing, and at this point, he would have been 16. However, when he returned home, he actually had brown hair and brown eyes and was extremely tall. Now, Nicholas actually had an explanation for why his hair colour had changed and why his eye colour had changed, but we'll delve into that in a bit. But of course, when he landed in the Texan airport in San Antonio, the family reunion was a bit strange. Nobody really recognized him. He didn't look how the family was expecting him to look. Nicholas and Carrie were actually the last two people to get off the plane. And once again, he was actually completely covered in sunglasses, a hat, gloves, a scarf, and a jacket. Now, his brother Jason didn't even show up to the airport to greet Nicholas coming back home, but Beverly, his mother, did, obviously. But when she did meet him at the airport, her face was in a complete state of shock. She didn't seem excited at all that her missing son was standing in front of her. She was completely unamused. Now, Nicholas and his mother Beverly, neither of them seemed to be excited about seeing each other again after all these years, and strangely, Nicholas actually didn't recognize anyone, but this could be explained, and was explained by the time in the family that Nicholas had suffered quite a great deal of trauma, and that had caused some kind of amnesia of him blocking out his earlier years. And no one thought much of this entire thing.
So when he got back home, he enrolled into high school. He started hanging out with his old friends again, and he met a new girl named Amy, and life just seemed to go on as normal. So after a while, Jason did decide to come visit Nicholas, and once again, the reunion was completely bizarre. Jason didn't say much of anything to Nicholas once he got there. He didn't come and give Nicholas a hug. He didn't really seem excited at all, and didn't even stay very long to see his brother. He kind of came over, stood there and looked at him, said good luck, and just left. This isn't what you would expect whatsoever from a brother who is seeing his long-lost brother for the first time in almost 4 years after he had gone missing. The entire time that Nicholas was home, the family was just kind of going along with the entire situation and didn't really ask Nicholas what happened to him, where he went, or anything like that. However, Nancy Fisher from the FBI was really invested in trying to figure out exactly what happened to Nicholas so that she could take down the human trafficking ring and catch the people who did this to him. So she did bring him in for an interview, and the first thing that she noticed was that this did not look like a 16-year-old kid, but a grown-ass man. He clearly had a beard that he had shaved, and he was pretty tall and just did not look anything like a teenager. Also, this person had a French accent. There wasn't really any reason for him to have a French accent. She also thought that he looked extremely uncomfortable and was very closed off, and he was not really willing to speak to her whatsoever.
Now, eventually, she did actually get him to speak, and what he said was that he had been taken by some high-ranking military officers or military officials before being sold into human trafficking. They had put him in a bin, put him in an airplane, and shipped him to God knows where before putting him in a room with some other children. He said that every single night that he was there, the children were sexually abused by European, Mexican, and American men, and these men were all allegedly military officials. He said that some of the children were abused every single day that they were there, but some of the others, they weren't abused every single day. And he went on to say that he was actually one of the children that was lucky enough not to be abused every single day. He said that these men had actually broken his right hand multiple times. He also said that they broke his foot several times by repeatedly hitting him with a baseball bat. He said that they burned him and hit him with a crowbar, and that they fed him insects. He said that these men would force you to wear headphones and would repeatedly play the words, "You are not you," through these headphones in multiple different languages. It was as if these men were trying to change their identities into someone different. They were trying to change these children's identities. He claims that they had dyed his hair to dark brown from blonde after he was taken, and that they'd used some kind of eye drop every single day in his eyes to slowly change his eye colour from blue to brown. Now, when Nancy asked him how he escaped, he said that there was in the room a door which was connected to a corridor which led to another door, and somehow at some points he managed to actually get out of both of these doors while nobody was looking, and when he got out the other side he just ran and ran and ran for his life, and he tried to get as far away as possible. He said that after 3 years in captivity he had randomly picked up this French accent, which actually a lot of experts say is a very normal thing to occur. I know for a fact when I was living in America for a short while, I picked up a bit of a weird American British accent, so it is very likely that this had occurred. After living somewhere for long enough, it isn't unusual for someone to pick up the local accent.
Of course, Nancy thought that there's no way that someone could just make all of this up. It seemed so real, and this young man really did show signs of going through something traumatizing. Like I said, he was quiet, reserved, scared, and just didn't want to talk. He had answers for everything and an entire story of this whole human trafficking ring and how he was able to escape. He had the same exact tattoos as Nicholas and had the scars to prove that his hand and foot had been broken and he had been burned. So even though there were a few things that were very off about his story and this entire situation, those around him just kind of had no choice but to believe him.
Now, because of how crazy this entire story was, a film crew from the TV show called Hard Copy actually hired a private investigator to find more information about what happened. And this private investigator was called Charlie Parker, and he went into the family home to interview Nicholas. Now, Charles Parker was actually one of the original private investigators on the Nicholas case. And Charles had expressed his interest and suspicions in this case after seeing that Nicholas looked so different when he was found. He was really excited to get in there and interview Nicholas and find out more. He was really intrigued by Nicholas's story.
Now, during this interview, he was kind of able to sit in the back of the interviewer and was able to look at a photo of Nicholas from before he went missing and how he looked after. He had a gut feeling that something just was not right about this entire thing. Of course, he noticed that his eyes were a different color, and even though he had a story for this, it just didn't sit right with him. After sitting there and observing for a while, it finally hit him that the ears looked different. He said to the cameraman, "Zoom in on the ears," and they were completely different. So he got a close-up photo of Nicholas's ear from before he was kidnapped and the ear of the person that they just interviewed and compared them. He was absolutely positive that the ears were different, which meant that this really was not the real Nicholas. Charles Parker explained that your ears are basically like fingerprints. No two ears are exactly the same, so if the ears don't match up, there's no way that it can be this person.
So of course, after realizing this, he actually phoned Nancy Fisher, the FBI agent that had interviewed him prior, and he told her what he had found out. However, Nancy wasn't having any of it. Nancy didn't actually want Charles to interview Nicholas in the first place. And this was because Nancy thought that Charles interviewing Nicholas would somehow hinder the investigation. And Nancy believed that at this point it would be ridiculous to suggest that the family of Nicholas was just hosting a complete stranger in this house and pretending that this stranger was Nicholas. Nancy knew that Nicholas's mother, Beverly, knew her son and that she wouldn't just accept some random stranger into the house and pretend it was her son. So at first, nothing was done with this new information, but Charles, he was very, very insistent on revealing and, proving that this boy who was claiming to be Nicholas wasn't actually Nicholas. He just had to find concrete proof that he could show people that this boy was a fraud. Now, concurrently to Charles trying to find this proof, Nancy was actually trying to figure out who Nicholas's kidnappers were. And Nancy had actually sent Nicholas to a Texan children's hospital in Houston to receive psychiatric help, which could possibly help him, pinpoint his story and try and get his mind back together. And that was also hopefully to get everything cleared up.
At the Children's Hospital, a psychiatrist named Bruce Perry interviewed Nicholas, and he said that he got the same gut feeling that something was just off. He asked him questions about what happened, what it was like, things like that. However, Dr. Perry said that Nicholas did not show any signs of someone who had just gone through this unspeakable trauma. He didn't show any of the signs in his posture or mannerisms when he spoke about what happened. He didn't have the proper physiological responses like pupil dilation or increased heart rate as someone who experienced trauma. He also, of course, took notice of this man's strong accent, and he wasn't able to speak without a French accent whatsoever. While he did agree that someone could pick up an accent like this after living somewhere for a while, he said that since he had spent the first 13 years of his life with an English accent, even though he may have picked up a French accent, there's no way that the French accent would be so strong that he would be unable to speak in the English accent whatsoever. He was able to determine that this person was not American, therefore it was not Nicholas. Of course, he immediately got on the phone with Nancy Fisher and told her what he had discovered. Now, Nicholas had taken a plane to get to Houston from San Antonio, so when he was flying back, his sister Carrie was going to be the one to meet him at the airport and bring him home. So immediately after Nancy had received the news from Bruce, she got on the phone with Carrie to let her know that this was an imposter. Of course, Carrie was completely surprised, and Nancy told her not to pick up this man from the airport, that they were going to pick him up so that she didn't have this random, possibly dangerous man in their house.
However, when Nancy and Nicholas arrived at the airport, Carrie was still at the airport and still acted excited to see this man, as if she hadn't actually received a phone call a few minutes prior saying that this man was actually a phony. So Nancy called up the district's attorney office and was like, what do I do? And they told her to just take this imposter back to the home, as if nothing had ever happened, and that is exactly what she did. Now, this whole thing is so weird, and of course, it's so strange that this entire family was in complete denial. It made everyone feel really uncomfortable. This family was in such a state of denial that they were letting a complete stranger into their home. Now, Nancy decided the most surefire way of determining whether this boy was an imposter or not was to conduct a DNA test. But the family wasn't interested in this at all. They were against this idea. Beverly full-on refused to do a DNA test and actually threw quite a hissy fit when she was asked to do the DNA test. She was absolutely adamant that this was her son and that she didn't need to do a DNA test to prove that. Now, this actually made everyone extremely suspicious, so Charles decided to go around to the neighbors and interview them to find out anything more. He wanted to find out what Nicholas was like before he went missing. The neighbors told him that Nicholas was a problem child, that he was constantly abusing his mother, that he had constant problems at school and had constant run-ins with the law, with the police often coming to the family home. This made Charles realize that there was actually something a lot more to this disappearance than he originally thought and suspected.
So because the family was refusing to cooperate, the FBI issued a warrant to obtain blood samples and fingerprints from the family. They went over, collected the evidence, and sent it off for testing. However, as they were waiting for the results to come back, this Nicholas imposter was getting increasingly aggressive and irritated. He was throwing fits and tantrums and was just getting so out of controllably angry. At this point, the walls were starting to close in on him, and he knew that he was about to be exposed. After the test results came back, the man was identified as 23-year-old French citizen by the name of Frédéric Pierre Bourdin. Frédéric Bourdin had a criminal history and was actually wanted by Interpol for posing as many different minors in the past. He stayed in many different children's shelters and used many different names and claimed to have been through a number of different traumas. So of course he was deported back to France because that's where he was from.
Now, Frédéric's reasoning for why he had impersonated all of these different children was because he had a terrible childhood and that he liked acting and he wanted to pretend to be a different person and he just wanted to start afresh as a new person. He said that he found out all this information about Nicholas after getting it from a missing child center. Now, apparently the way he had done this was that he had called up a bunch of different agencies and said that he was looking for somebody who was aged between 15 and 16, and then eventually he slowly managed to get enough information out of all these different agencies and piece together an accurate picture of what Nicholas was like. They inadvertently gave him all of the case's information, and he used that to his advantage so that he could become Nicholas, so that he could pose as Nicholas. However, when he actually saw the missing person's flyer, which had Nicholas's face on, he realized that he didn't look like him at all. So what he decided to do was to get one of the other children at the shelter to give him a tattoo that matched Nicholas's tattoo. And that is also why he decided to wear the disguise the entire time.
So of course, Frédéric was sent to jail after police discovered all of this, and he was sentenced to 6 6 years. During his time in jail, Frederick actually came out and said that Nicholas's mother admitted to him that her and Jason actually killed Nicholas and that Carrie knew about it, but she didn't take part in it. Of course, this was huge and police kind of already had their suspicions to begin with, so they started their investigation into the family. Again, this person had a French accent. He looked way older than 16 and he had a completely different eye and hair color, and just everything about this was so strange that there really wasn't any other reason that they would just let this stranger into their home. There's no way that this family thought that this was Nicholas, and there's no real reason why they would just let this random guy into their house. It would make sense though that if the family had something to hide, that they would just go along with this whole thing. It could be seen as suspicious if when they were told that Nicholas was found, they were like, no, that's not him, because how would they know that it's not him unless they knew what really happened to Nicholas? So it makes sense that they would let this stranger live with them if they really did have something to hide. We could tell on the mother's face that something was off about this reunion, and she knew that it was not Nicholas.
So during the police investigation, Nicholas's mother was actually made to conduct 3 different polygraph tests, and she passed 2 of those polygraph tests with flying colours. However, she failed the last one miserably. According to the polygraph test, she had lied in her answers for every single question that she was asked. Now, according to some sources, the person that was conducting the polygraph test, the polygraph examiner, noticed that she was just lying and just straight up asked her whether she knew where her son was, and Beverly's response to this was just to get up and to run out of the room. She was freaking out and panicking, so she just left. Now, for those of you who watch my channel, you know that I talk quite frequently whenever polygraphs come up in cases about the inaccuracies of polygraph tests, and really how it's so simple to fake a polygraph test, and it's easy to manipulate a polygraph test, even with modern technology, with most independent experts estimating that a polygraph test with modern technology is only between 50 and 70% accurate. Now, I must point out that the American Polygraph Association pinpoints polygraph tests to be 90% accurate, but like I have described in a few of my videos, there is a reason why you have to take what the conclusion of the American Polygraph Association's study was, and the results of that, you got to take that with a grain of salt, and you just have to look at their funding source to realize why. Now, when they tried to get a hold of Jason, it was very difficult to get a hold of him. It was very difficult to contact him. And when they did finally get a hold of him, he was very hostile towards them and didn't want to cooperate at all. He was completely uncooperative and was completely disinterested in the entire thing. Now, the strange thing is that Jason had been clean from drugs for quite a while. However, just a few days after he was questioned, he passed away from a drug overdose, which is a strange event to occur after being clean for so long. However, this could be pointed to the fact that maybe the questioning brought up some kind of trauma that he used drugs as a coping mechanism to work through and ultimately succumbed to a drug overdose. Although this is just a theory, who knows what happened. Either way, it was extremely weird.
This made everyone believe that if they didn't do something to Nicholas, that they definitely knew what happened at the very least. Again, we know about all the weird behaviors from Beverly. We know that Carrie was convinced that this random stranger was her brother, even after being told that it was some random man. Also, we think back to the call that Jason made to police months after he went missing, when he claimed that he saw Nicholas in the garage, but police found no evidence that he had ever been there. It would make sense that if they really did do something to Nicholas, that he would try and throw off police by making it look like he just ran away. So basically what people believe is that Jason, Beverly, or the both of them killed Nicholas. We know that he was a problem child who got into trouble all the time and hit his mom and made their lives very difficult. We know that according to their story, Jason was the last one to speak with Nicholas. We know that Jason didn't even show up to the airport when he found out that his brother could have possibly been found. And I don't know about you, but even if I really hated my sibling, if they were missing and were found 4 years later, I would go to the airport to see them. In my opinion, especially with Nicholas being so young, there's nothing that he could have done to make Jason hate him so much that if he really did disappear, that he wouldn't even show up to the airport when he was found. It does make sense though that if he knew this wasn't Nicholas because he knew that Nicholas was dead, that he wouldn't go to the airport to just meet some random guy. And again, everything with Beverly and Carrie points to them knowing that this wasn't Nicholas, but wanting to make it look like they thought it was. Maybe he got into trouble after he played basketball with his friends that made Jason and Beverly so frustrated that they accidentally killed him, or maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe they thought that Nicholas was just too much to handle, so they got rid of him the only way that they knew how. Or maybe someone else did something to him and they covered it up. There is a possibility that someone did something to Nicholas as he was walking home from basketball, but the family's behaviors are just far too suspicious for me to believe that. Maybe he never even went to basketball and walked home, and the family just told police that he walked home to set up their story to make it look like he was possibly abducted on the way home. I think the most likely scenario is that the family did something to Nicholas and there just isn't enough evidence to do anything to the family. I think their behaviors surrounding this entire case are extremely telling, and pretty much everything points to the family in my opinion. So that is pretty much all of the information that we have in this case today. What do you guys think? Do you think that the family did something to Nicholas, or do you think that something else could have happened? Please let us know in the comments below. If you guys like this video, please make sure to leave this video a thumbs up. Also, make sure to check out Joshua's video on his channel as a part of the Summer of True Crime collabs. Make sure to subscribe to both mine and Joshua's channels. We put out new true crime content every single week. Don't forget to follow us on our Twitters and Instagrams. All will be linked in the description box below. With that, I hope you guys are enjoying the Summer of True Crime collabs. Don't forget to check out Joshua's channel and everyone else's channel that is involved in this collab. There are so many amazing content creators involved, and I feel so lucky and blessed to have been a part of it. With that being said, I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!